son of a migrant worker or sharecropper, the fact that we remember where we came from and our experiences when we become reporters, attorneys, or policymakers, that if we draw from our experience in our past, we can look at those policies and make it even more precise and focused so that it does provide a pathway and openings for future application. In your case, when you talk about limitations and destroying people's thinking about limitations of farm workers and their family, you break that barrier. People are now saying among farm workers that it's a profession too, because when I heard that word from Artie Rodriguez, I thought, yeah, because we have to teach people how to, if it's strawberries, you pick strawberries a certain way, you present it a certain way so that people can purchase it. It's a marketing kind of thing. And that you don't allow the monkey faces to be on the bottom, you put the good ones on top. Or just chopping cabbage and things that I saw you do on the film. I guess the other thing is, in terms of policy and immigration reform, we look at what do they call it, the workers program. What's that? Workers program. They really were trying to get from farm workers and ag owners.
The future flow. They're in serious discussions right now, and I think we're close to an agreement.
Yeah, that when we do that, it's like it could be as like H-1B or it could be
H-2A.
H-2A. That there's a pathway for those who decide to stay and then move on. And if your dad didn't stay and have that determination to buy the house and see the film, that, and then having certain kinds of sense of self, a lot of pathways would have been obstructed. I think we have an opportunity in the companies of immigration reform to look at not only the policies as we solve a certain, but look in the future and how we can avoid repeating the same kinds of things. So, to you, Ms. Brown, thank you for the film and thank you for sharing.
Thank you for hosting us. This is pretty awesome.
Judge Chapman felt the court had no jurisdiction to prosecute Wairiji. He did encourage the prosecutor to appeal the decision.
The majority of Americans don't come from the fields of Salinas and blistering heat and reach the pinnacle of a given industry.
These soldiers generally last about 30 days, but things are moving so fast in Washington that soldiers here are having to cram that training.
It's just a tremendous success to see someone that comes from extremely humble roots, but folks that are proud, folks that are talented, folks that are committed, and folks that believe in helping one another and supporting one another. And that so much tells the story of many Latino families.
Mexicans here in Mexico and all across Latin America also. They're expecting about 10 million.
We talk about a profile in courage. To see a young man who comes from this background, whose family had to work just to struggle to survive, but instilled in him the value of getting an education, of doing something with your life that's important, helping others. A person of color is a person from a cultural community that needs to be recognized more for what it contributes to America. For this young man to do something like that is extraordinary.
Well, I'm in San Jose. I'm Damian Trujillo, NBC Bay Area News.
My dad was called a bracero. He came here back during the Korean War, second wave of the bracero program. Ultimately, that helped him get his green card, and that's how I was able to bring my mom and my siblings across.
I was just glamorized with all the lights, because where we came from, there was no electricity.
Pues fue mucho sufrimiento que hubo mucho sufrimiento
the station wagon, and it was 3 dads were in the front, which was my dad's compadre driver, and my dad and another person, and then in the back seat it was my mom and the 2 other ladies, 2 of us.
We just remember my dad saying, your mom is sick, I need to take her to the hospital. And when she came back, it's like we had another brother. It's like, oh my God, you know, what happened?
It was a trailer with only 2 rooms, and there was no time to be scared. My mom and dad slept in one room with the baby, and everybody else slept in the other room.
En el field trabajando mucho de sol a sol, mucho, mi esposo también, los dos trabajábamos mucho.
I remember that she would work also in the fields. I would come home from school, and she'd come home at 4 o'clock, and she'd slam a Budweiser and start rolling up her sleeves.
At that time, all the families would carry their kids in their station wagon, and they would stay in the fields on the side of the field while the parents worked. And they would stay in the car all day long.
My dad was hardworking. Sometimes I wouldn't see him because he worked out in the fields. And we were belted. We were hit with a branch or a shoe, whatever was handy, and that was their form of discipline. And that's all what they apologized for.
When my dad bought a house, everybody would say, are you crazy? You plan on staying here? What do you think? You know, you're leaving your town, you're betraying. And my dad said, I only want the best for my kids.
It was a 3-bedroom home, and there were 10 of us living in it.
For the first time we had a home we could call a home that, you know, he was trying his best to make it better.
It used to be my room here, mine, and I shared with 5 of my brothers. Some days we would all get up, the 3 younger ones, we would get up at 7 a.m. just laying.
La cocina. Bueno, así como está toda aquí.
This was our dining area here, so there were 10 of us crammed in here.
Since he was a little boy, we knew he was not going to be like us.
Okay, hi. So with the general feeling of immigration reform, why now? Why is immigration reform happening right now?
Well, I think a lot of us have been working for immigration reform for many, many years. But I think the urgency in terms of the other side of the aisle has a lot to do with last November's election, where Governor Romney received less than 1/3 of the vote among key electoral sectors, Asian Americans, Latino voters. I mean, it was a crushing defeat. And I think leaders in the Republican Party have taken a look at their future and don't see a bright one unless they can speak to the fastest growing demographics in the country, and getting right with immigration reform is part of that. The system is a mess. I used to teach immigration law. People don't realize how dysfunctional it is until they somehow run into it because of their family or work. It's from the visa system to enforcement, it's just a mess and needs to be fixed. And I think we have at least a chance of fixing it now.
And how will fixing the immigration system help families like Mr. Trujillo's family?
Well, it's important that if you're here doing a job that we need you to do, that you're able to do that with dignity and with stability. If you look at Damien, I mentioned also we have members of Congress whose family members were migrant farm workers. That's part of the American dream is your parents come here, work hard so that their kids can get ahead. And we need to make sure that that part of the American history is part of our future, the American dream.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
One more question, the importance with the event here today with Damien.
Well, I think It's having Damien here today to tell his personal story is part of the bigger picture. We know him at home, but of course not everyone in Washington, D.C. knows his story. We had here yesterday a rally with tens of thousands of people. We had the president of the Farm Workers Union here yesterday trying to reach conclusions and compromises that will help get this immigration bill done. And I think Damien's personal story will be part of that bigger picture. At least I hope so.
Okay. In case this goes out in the feed service, somebody else will speak up. Can you say and spell your name?
I'm Zoe Lofgren, Zoe Lofgren. I'm a member of Congress in the 19th Congressional District and the senior Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Energy. When he talked, people would shut up and listen because he was able to articulate what his family was going through and what people in his community were trying to deal with and what were really important issues that we should be writing about.
He was the most persistent of all seeking an internship, but he knew that he wasn't going to give up.
The thing that really stuck out for me is he would go after very tough stories, sometimes potentially dangerous stories, because he felt there was a community need to expose certain things.
He was learning and working, and he wanted to assimilate, but at the same time, he wanted to keep his roots. I think the experience for Damien there was one of self-discovery, and I think there's a lot of things that he realized coming to a big city, a big university.
We had this show called Radio Aslan. We called ourselves the Brown Berets of the airwaves. And we pushed the button a lot, we pushed the envelope a lot. But in doing these interviews on the radio, I started enjoying what that was like. I fell in love with the microphone.
We actually worked to establish a fraternity on campus at San Jose State. And we invited everyone in. It just so happened the guys that started were all Latinos. And it was a way for us to build a support structure because, you know, it was somewhat lacking on campus at that point. So we figured, well, if no one else is going to help us, why don't we just kind of get together and help ourselves?
Loans, grants, Cal Grant, Pell Grant, you name it, I applied for it.
My mom would suffer. He would say, he's getting wet, you know. So that makes me kind of emotional because he was getting wet. And then afterwards, my mom tried. My dad got him a car.
There are strong consequences for us if I failed in school. I don't mean.
Bueno, fue una cosa que no puedo explicar el gusto que da cuando se gradúa uno de sus hijos.
I was a little girl, that I was never going to go to high school, and that I was never going to go to the university, and that I was never going to be, someone important. I knew that, but I always wanted my brothers to. I always did. So when Damien fulfilled that, it was like my dream. He graduated me.
It breaks my heart that my sister, for me, she's like my second mom, but yeah, they did. He wanted to demonstrate to his parents that the sacrifices they made so he could become educated would give them, and say that, it was worth it. Valió mucho. It was really worth all the time and energy we put into working in the fields to give Damien these opportunities.
And it's the person who dishes out story ideas and whatnot.
Ahora, esas dos niñas tendrán que pasar la Navidad.
So I became a reporter, and then I was there reported for a year and a half at Telemundo, and I've been at KNTV ever since.
He was an apprentice reporter first, and this was a position that KNTV.
On there, it means you're still learning.
It's unusual for someone to be as good as he was, as young as he was.
Two top Democrats vying for the presidency squared off in Washington.
I've seen a lot of people try to make the transition from Spanish-speaking news to English-speaking news, and it's not easy. It's not just a matter of language, it's a matter of...
But this is work. This is the control room. first time I heard myself, I said, who is that guy? Because I didn't recognize my voice.
I heard some of the comments where people will say, like, gosh, Damien's so good for being a Mexican, or Damien's so good at what he does for being Latino. And I think it's just ignorance that people just don't know what they're saying, but people like the work that he does and that he produces.
Damien Trujillo, NBC Bay Area News. Someone called the front desk.
With an accent or a personal style or way of saying things that represents a culture or a life experience, I tell them, bravo. Don't let people take that away from you. Don't let us homogenize that away. Identity starts with the uniqueness.
In Greenfield, as a kid, as a 12-year-old, I watched this show for no reason other than it intrigued me that there was a Latino hosting a show, which is something that I never saw growing up.
It makes him feel so proud when non-Latinos are watching his show in that. And I think that's where he's really made his niche in reaching a wide array of audiences and cultures.
Whenever I was growing up as an African American in Chicago, when I would look for somebody black on the air who was representing the culture in a positive and an informative way. Damien does that for the Mexican American community. He does that for people of color in general. He does that for any cultural group underrepresented.
The illegals or illegal alien. And it stirred up a conversation throughout the entire network. So the policy became, we do not use the words illegals, the illegals. We prefer undocumented immigrants.
I mean, he's willing to challenge the upper management.
And Damien was a part of the all-Latino fraternity at San Jose State that helped set up the chairs, the tables, and get the pageant ready.
I was volunteering, and I saw her, and I said, oh my God, I want to marry that girl. And I hadn't even met her. And my friends laughed because she was beautiful.
Fast forward, we ended up meeting, I was San Jose State journalism student. We want our kids to be proud of who they are and where their ancestors are from.
Mommy, you need to, this is called comprensión. You need to understand what you read. I remember on Cesar Chavez's holiday, he had his children out in the fields, picking lettuce, cutting.
It's an eagle that represents Cesar Chavez and what he did for the farm workers.
Sí.
Se puede.
Sí se puede. That means you can do anything you want to do?
Yes.
Yes. He is such a and he has a tremendous impact and outreach to people on a consistent basis.
He wasn't that flashy guy, gotta grab that camera light and be a star. He's not that guy. He is a very steady, very dedicated working journalist.
To me, I'm proud. Real proud of him. Yeah. And we know that he came from this community, so everything's possible.
He is an asset to American journalism. There aren't too many families like a Trujillo family. They're all solid representatives of not only their culture, what their parents taught them, but they're fine Americans.
No, I'm a Chicano. I'm an American. The flag is outside my front door. I love this country. I was born here. But, you know, my roots are deep in Mexican culture, and I don't hide that, and I tout it. But I'm a proud American.
Why does anybody need to hear a Damien Trujillo story? Because we all need to be encouraged. Life is tough. Many of us are up.
Done, and Damien has proved that it can be done.
I never imagined I'd be in this position, and I didn't get here alone. When the camera lights go off at 6:30 after my live shot, it's not over. It's never over.
Damien, if you would be willing to take some questions, and there's various questions. So would anybody like to start off with a question?
USA Today came out with it today. Associated Press did it last week. New York Times is thinking about doing it, and that's eliminating the use of illegal immigrants. And I, as a journalist, can't be an advocate. I can't be a lobbyist. It's my duty and my honor to my press pass is to remain neutral and not take sides on any issue. But there are ways to make change, even in journalism. And one is challenging your corporate bosses and asking them what our policy is on verbiage and how we change that policy. And that was 7 years ago. It's nice to see that the Associated Press has kind of come around and doing that as well.
If I failed, you know, the consistency of feeling as if your family depended on investing in you and believing in that American dream. How do you think we could get that to be much more, you know, put out into the press and experienced by people who don't see this video?
Well, I mean, when I speak to students and whatnot, we spoke at Harvard last night, and my message is always, I bought a T-shirt down at the Science Museum, and it says, "Failure is not an option." And that's kind of the model that we need to start ingraining in our children. There's a song in Spanish, same thing. I've used that since I was in college. It's called "No me sé rajar." I don't know how to quit. And that's just the model that we need to start ingraining in our children, is that we can't make excuses. I could have easily said, I'm a farm worker. I'm the son of immigrants. Those are my excuses. This is why I'm not going to make it. But because in the end, they become excuses. So we have to not accept failure as an option. And we can't quit. We can't learn how to quit. And that's what I've been trying to, I think that's grit. That's the bottom line, I think, what I'm getting from this doc. And when Carolyn pitched the idea to me, I said, no, I don't want to do a whole story on me, because it's not a big deal. I mean, there are a lot of people like me who are in higher positions and smarter than me and who came from the same background. So she asked again, and I said, it's not a big deal, really. And then I thought about it, and I said, you know what? It is a big deal. It's a story of challenge, and it's a story of grit. And if
previous to being a professor and a filmmaker, I was a TV news producer. That's how I knew Damien at MSNBC and Fox News Channel before I went to academia. And the messages I saw in mainstream media were all very negative about Latinos as undocumented immigrants, as gang members, as pregnant moms, teen pregnant moms. And I try to do with this film and my work is to present an oppositional representation of Latinos in opposition to what we're used to seeing, in it being a positive message. And that's Damien's story. This type of story about Latinos living in the United States has to become told more in the mainstream. And I think that's what you're asking. How, if you don't get to see this, how are other people not going to hear this message? That's why I'm so grateful for Congressman Honda for doing this screening. We have this whole front row here are my students at American.
Mr. Cantor would be willing to come over here.
I know.
But
we call him Cantor.
The other thing, I think, when we were trying to come up, when Carolyn was trying to come up with a title, I wanted the word American in there, because it's not just a Latino. This is an American story. I mean, I'm an American born, and a lot of my friends were American born, and we think of farm work and as an immigrant industry, but in a way it is, but in a way it's not. I was challenged at Harvard last night as to why, because they wanted me to use Latino in the title, a Latino story or whatnot, and I said, well, you know what? It's about self-identity, and you probably could use it for your story. I chose American because I'm an American, and I want Americans to see this as an American story.
It's problematic, the title, and I've gotten compliments, and I've recently got an email complaining about the title from someone who saw it.
Yeah, but when you talked about it, there was a clarity about who you were. There was no denial of any part of your history or your background. So, you know, you went through all the terminology, Latino, Chicano, Mexican, but I'm an American. So I think the idea of being clear is an important message, because those of us come from blended backgrounds or immigrant backgrounds, we always, we hyphenate our name, which is okay, but it's the clarity in your own mind and your own self that's important, and that we don't have youngsters growing up being unclear about how to describe themselves. And I thought it was pretty clear. It's pretty evident. So it's probably a good idea, but it's a good thing that people challenge it. So it gives an opportunity to, say, I'm very clear about who I am. Yeah. And then the whole issue of failure. Failure is not an option, but I also heard you say you're the sixth of 8 children, and there was 2 more behind you. And you wouldn't accept the consequences of failure, because I thought that you were thinking about your brothers too.
And that's what it was. I remember going home once, and I was having a good time in college. My grades weren't all that good, and I remember my sister having a conversation. She was excited. She said, "Oh, I can't believe it. I can't wait till you graduate. We're gonna have a big party for you." And that's when I thought, "Oh my goodness, this isn't about me. This is there's a lot. I'm here for family."
Yeah.
I've seen it 50 times, and I get choked up every time. Sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to.
That's a very good way to put it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I mentioned about comprehensive immigration reform and the worker programs and everything else like that, and going beyond the programs and looking at family as a continuum in this country. This is a great argument for that. Piece of information that humans will do what they have to do in order to improve their lives and their children's lives.
It talked about the courage of my parents and your parents and grandparents, and leaving everything behind and leaving your country and being challenged by your friends saying you're betraying your country, and saying, hey, this is something. Yeah, it's a
pretty nice house too, huh? Not really.
It's an old farmhouse that they kind of moved and planted in the middle of town. So.
Yeah, personally speaking, I had a father who was from Ghana and a mother who was white, so I had a little bit of both, the immigrant narrative as well as the American narrative. I've always considered myself equally African American, but I think growing up
is important.
Well, I think the future, using your words, the future consequences of not thinking it through and just saying that this is a law and that's it, without thinking of the human pathway, that it continues. What do you do? It's like H-1B visas. They bring in a person with certain skills for 3 2-year stints, and they offer them nothing else, thinking that a job is enough. And all we want is them to do a job. And to me, that's just like being a high-tech coolie. You bring the Chinese in to build a railroad, and once the railroad's finished,
thank you very much.
So it's going beyond what is it that, how do we think beyond that? So.
And let me introduce Christine Chavez. She works at USDA, a place where Cesar Chavez wasn't invited to in 150 years. And Christine is a granddaughter of Cesar Chavez, and she's doing her thing here. And it's the same story. It's the same story of the challenge. She was arrested as a 4-year-old?
Yeah.
She was arrested as a 4-year-old for doing what she had to do.
Leafleting in front of a supermarket.
Yeah, imagine that.
No, but I was just going to say I loved, I know you and Monica and your kids also every year during my grandfather's birthday, you guys get together and make lunch for the farm workers. You go out to the field and you put a pamphlet in the lunch bag just telling them about what their rights are. And that's just something, a lot of people do marches and those things, and those are great also, but to actually go out on Cesar Chavez's birthday and, let these workers know that their work is appreciated is just something that I've always admired about you and Monica and now your kids that are coming right behind making the lunches and everything for the workers. So I think it's great that you continue to give back. And I love how his mom called you out, called you a ripotero, even when you were little. Yes, waiting by the gate to tell everything that happened in the house.
Now I'm a professional
Exactly. Now you have the mic. You know what also I noticed that, so yourself and then one of your friends that went to school with you also works at NBC.
What a metaphor, though. First kernel of a corn, and then you became another corn.
Yeah.
Great
Now I'm just corny. Thank you. Well, thank you. I really do. It's such an awesome feeling to be here and to be invited by you to do this, and I appreciate it.
Proud of you.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for sitting here.